Okay, guys, it's Mrs. Benshoff here, and I wanted to talk about the poetry study, Ralph Pomeroy's Corner. And so, step one, what I would like for you to do on your own is to read over the poem. And then, if you look at the directions, I would like for you to annotate the poem. So you can underline the figurative language that you see. So, similes, metaphors, hyperboles, which is an exaggeration. You can also underline or highlight examples of personification or onomatopoeia, which are sound words, or any other devices that you see. You can also make note of ideas that cross your mind. But what I'd like for you to do before you continue any further with this video is to read the poem on your own and annotate it. Okay? All right, so pause the video and do that, and then I'm going to assume that you're picking up at roughly 1 minute and 25 seconds or so. Okay? So your poem, now that you've annotated it, may look something like this. Okay, so the first thing that we do is we notice that corner is our title. And so when you think about the word corner, you might think about the place where two points meet, the corner of a room, for example. And when you think about what happens in the poem, this seems to make sense because we have a cop and we have a speaker who have met up, so to speak. They're standing on opposite sides of the street, but it's a place where the two have met. You might also, if we're thinking about corner connotatively, you might also associate trouble with corner. Maybe when you were a child, you may have had to go to the corner if you got in trouble. And so sometimes we associate trouble with this. In larger cities, sometimes we associate illegal activity with corner. And again, both of those seem to make sense within the context of the poem because it's almost as if the cop thinks that the speaker has done something wrong. And we don't know or not. The speaker never confesses to anything like that, but the cop certainly seems suspicious of the speaker. And then we should also think about corner in terms of being a verb. So if I say something like, hey, Mrs. Benshoff stopped Isaac after class, or Mrs. Benshoff cornered Isaac after class, the idea that cornered, would suggest that maybe I was upset with Isaac or that Isaac felt trapped. And if you think about the cop and the speaker, they certainly seem trapped within this stare down. So if we look at stanza 1, which stanzas are just basically paragraphs in poetry, we see a couple of things going on. In line 1, even though I didn't ask you to point this out, you may have recognized that slumps alertly is an oxymoron. You have two things that seem very opposite, but when you put them together, there's some kind of truth there. And then we have supported by one leg like a leather stork, and so we have a simile. His glance accuses me is an example of personification. And then I can see his eyes moving like a fish is a simile as well. And then the last line of the stanza, we see alliteration, green, green, goggles. Stanza 2, we notice the first two lines are a lot of repetition. And so you might ask yourself, okay, what does this repetition suggest? And for me as a reader, it seems like the cop and the speaker feel like they're on opposite sides, but they're more alike than what they might want to admit. Okay, they both have this fake ease about them, and they both can tell this about each other. Then we notice the fingers armored by his gloves. And so this is a metaphor comparing gloves to body armor. And so you have to ask yourself, who wears armor? Well, knights used to don armor before they went into battle. So again, it connects to this idea that the speaker and the cop are in some kind of battle. It may not be physical, but there's some kind of conflict going on between the two. And then we have itching to change something. While your fingers can certainly itch, they can't itch to change something. So we said that was an example of personification. And then as if he were my enemy or my death, simile. I think if you would have just said as if he were my enemy, that's probably not a simile, because a simile is a comparison between two unlike things, but calling him his death definitely makes this a simile. Then we look at stanza 3, all right? The first line seems to have some really good sensory details. And then he says, I knock out my new cigarette. And so we talked about this in terms of connotation and denotation. Why not just say, I take out my new cigarette? Why say, I knock out my new cigarette? They both mean the same thing, but knock adds that aggressive, sort of fierce tone to what the speaker is saying. And so it's almost like battle language. Like these two are ready to knock one another out. They're ready to go to battle. And so again, being familiar with the connotations of words helps us really understand the tone of the piece on a deeper level. And then the speaker says, I knock out my new cigarette, which is my bravery. And so we have a metaphor here. And again, you can have more than this. I'm just sort of giving you an overview, some detail. You can certainly have more, but you get the idea. Some students have pointed out that creaks seems to be an example of onomatopoeia, a sound word there. Moving on to the next stanza, we have the traffic is specific, though constant. The sun surrounds me seems to be an example of personification, divides the street between us. Again, that division between the cop and the speaker is being emphasized. Not only do they seem divided by the street, but they're also divided in society. And so this reminds me of, recent examples in the media where, there seems to be a real divide between white police officers, at least according to the media, and African American citizens or minority citizens. And so we have no idea if that's what's at play here, but we definitely know that the cop and the speaker are divided. And then we have this, it is like a bull ring, as they say it is, just before the fighting. And so again, we have this simile, but it just seems especially tense, very tense. Moving on to the next stanza, we have everything holds me back, okay? So the idea that things can physically hold somebody back seems to be an example of personification, but it's also exaggeration, hyperbole. Danger, disappearing, dust, alliteration. Someone in another class also pointed out this idea of sunny dust is kind of almost like an oxymoron. My Levi's, which are jeans, bake, and my t-shirt sweats, personification. Don't dare drop, alliteration. And again, this is there for a reason, but I don't dare drop it. Those words add to the tone of the piece. And, this isn't a peaceful, serene, happy tone. This is tense. This is conflict. These two are ready to go to battle. The next one, who made him my enemy, Prince of Coolness, King of Fear. Prince of Coolness, King of Fear, that's probably new to you. Those are what we call kennings. That's where you rename someone. So I could say Sandy, my star pupil, my sophomore student, a shining diamond in class. All of those things rename Sandy. Okay. I also noticed the repetition of questions. Again, perhaps the speaker is questioning, why do we have to be divided? Why is it like this? And then looking at the last stanza, I am becoming sunlight is a metaphor. My hair is on fire, hyperbole. My boots run, personification. They run like tar, simile. I am hung up by the bright air, personification, this idea that the speaker cannot move. He's trapped, he's cornered in this situation. And then he blasts off quick as a craven, simile, snug in his power, watching me watch, alliteration. So now the question becomes, what are these literary devices doing? Like, we know they help us understand what's going on. They add detail. They paint a picture. We know those things. Now we need to dig deeper and really ask ourselves, how do they add to the meaning of the poem? Okay? So what you might want to do is you could pause the video and try to read through the poem without the figurative language. Okay, so take a moment, pause it right here, and read through it without the figurative language. Okay, picking back up. So ask yourself, what does this figurative language do for the poem? So let's look at this one right here. The traffic is specific, though constant. His crash helmet is whiter in the shade. I cannot back down. I am there. Okay? I think without this, the sun surrounds me, divides the street between us. It is like a bull ring, as they say it is, just before the fighting. When we don't have those, we don't get that these two are ready to battle at any moment. We don't get the tension that is building between the two. And so it seems to me that this figurative language really emphasizes the tension between the two. Okay, so those are your annotations. There is a verbal analysis. Watch the next video and we'll do part 2 together.